you don't want to be on video, then you're very welcome to turn the video off. But Charlie is starting recording now. Perfect. So, first of all, for those who are here for the first time, welcome to session 6 now of our wine therapy sessions around the world in 48 wines. We try and run this for about an hour and 15, so that we're done nicely in time to pop out and clap the NHS. The timings kind of work rather well. A few bits of housekeeping. You'll notice that you're all on mute at the moment. However, we're all grown-ups. I think we're about 40 people. So if you would like to make a comment as we go along, maybe just pop your hand up so Charlie or I or Nathan can see, and then please unmute yourself and comment freely. Of course, don't neglect the chat function, which I sometimes forget about, in fact, which is great fun. If you got, you know, a minor comment, as it were, or a small question, and you don't want to disrupt proceedings by breaking my flow, then you're very welcome just to pop that comment in the chat, and we will feed it into the tasting as we go. What else? Well, I think that covers the basics. We're as I said, we're going to run for about an hour or so, and we normally stay on for about 15 minutes after the allotted hour, just if anyone who's wants to ask any longer questions or just fancies a bit of a chat. So there we go. Right, you'll all be delighted to know, those of you who've been here before, that I have more maps, and hopefully they'll work a bit better than last time. I think I had some issues with my maps previously. So anyway, well, there are so many great things about Austrian wine, and not least of which is the organization. It's fabulous. The Austrian wine website, the official site, is just full of every possible conceivable bit of useful and perhaps less useful information, and they have some wonderful maps of each region and sub-region, so it's a really useful resource. Austria is a region. Austria is a country which, if you aren't familiar with it, it will really behove you to fall in love with Austrian wines. They have perennially been underrated and underrepresented, and there's various reasons for that, and we'll cover some of them as we go through the session. But I think for me, the aim of today especially is for you to come away from this with a greater degree of confidence and interest in learning more about what I think is one of the most exciting wine countries in the world, certainly in Europe and definitely the world, actually. So yeah, that's a punchy opening statement, but I think Austria deserves it. So has everyone, first of all, got in front of them and enjoying a glass of the Gruner Veltliner? Just checking everyone has. Excellent. What a wonderful, before we talk about it and anything specific about the region and the producer, isn't it just a glorious first wine of the evening? I mean, for me, this is everything that a beautiful, steely, minerally, fruit-driven, but clearly plenty of other character style unoaked white should give you on a warm evening. It's just my total go-to white. It really is. Perfect. So, Austria, long and noble history of viticulture, 4,000 years worth of viticulture, in fact, and all of it was spoiled in a moment in 1985 with the infamous antifreeze scandal, which we'll come on to later, in a bit. To the early times, the grape that you're enjoying now, Gruner Veltliner, has been grown around the Danube since Roman times. And after the barbarian invasions in the late 700s, it was actually, the vineyards were restored by Charlemagne himself, who, in fact, you'll remember, for those of you, a number of you, in fact, who were with us last week, we mentioned Charlemagne because he was such an important influence in Burgundy, where we were enjoying our wonderful wines last week. So apart from being the Holy Roman Emperor, he was one of the early wine lovers and big wine promoters, and being such a powerful man as well, clearly had sufficient influence to help define the quality of the wines in the areas in which he was based. Quick drink. So if we fast forward to the next important stages in the development of Austria as a wine country, really we couldn't skip past the devastation of phylloxera, devastatrix, in the early 1800s. Phylloxera, as you will know, ripped its way through Europe's vineyards, decimating 90% or more, and Austria, sadly, was no exception. It's interesting, though, that Austria has a noble history in so many respects of pulling itself up by its bootstraps, getting back off the ground, starting again, and doing things better. And phylloxera was the first challenge, and what it encouraged was to replant with more interesting varieties, with those which frankly made better wine. After the First World War, Austria was the third biggest wine producer in the world. So it just goes to show, you know, you can't keep a good Austrian down, however hard you might try, frankly. But, you know, there was a really concerted effort to get the Austrian wine industry back off its knees and making interesting wine. So the problem was really in the 60s and 70s, the vast majority of production was bulk wine, this thin, acidic, rather unpleasant stuff, which ultimately nobody particularly wanted to drink, but the wine brokers, the middlemen, would sell in bulk, you know, to go into very, very cheap table wines. It's not just Germany's fault that Teutonic wines have suffered in reputation for making sort of thin, either acidic or sweet or both wines, which, you know, appear at the very bottom of most supermarket shelves. And it got to a stage, quite frankly, where even the most modest of wine drinker just didn't want to drink these wines from Austria. They were just totally unpalatable, rather grim. So a particularly enterprising wine broker decided, what can we do here to make the wine a bit more palatable? And his genius idea was to add diethylene glycol, otherwise known as antifreeze, or a major component in antifreeze. So antifreeze, not that I've tried it personally, but adds body to a wine and a little more sweetness. So all in all, it probably improved the wine. It's very hard to detect chemically, in fact. And rather amusingly, the reason that this was found out was because this particular broker who had led the charge, as it were, with this extraordinary adulteration of the Austrian wine, had tried to claim the cost of this chemical, of this diethylene glycol, on his tax return when looking at winery expenses for the year. And needless to say, you know, the Austrians, Middle European bureaucrats, having a good look at someone's wine expenditure and seeing a large quantity of this strange chemical was asking, well, what on earth are you doing with that? And there's only so many times you can say that I was, you know, dabbing it on the windscreen of my BMW before I think people get rather suspicious. So, of course, yeah, this was not good. This was not good. In reality, the quantity of antifreeze that was being used would not be damaging to your health, probably no more harmful than the wine was to begin with. It was that grim. But you can imagine the headlines. Austrian wine adulterated with antifreeze. The industry more or less collapsed overnight, really. And this was in 1985. And it's a real shame that even today, people still refer back to this, what was at the time defining moment. I mean, I probably spent 5 or 6 minutes on it, and we must get beyond that, because just like phylloxera, just like the barbarian invasions before that, just like the war, all of these knocks which the industry had only served to make the wines better. Because what it meant was that all of a sudden, because Austrian wine was, vino non grata, they had to start again. They literally had to start again. And you cut out the middlemen, you cut out bulk grape growing, you cut out selling to cooperatives, you cut out, selling for nothing. And it meant that you started to see the rise of terroir-driven, domain-bottled, own-bottled, small artisan producers, next generation, the winemakers coming up in the late 80s, early 90s and beyond. Austria enjoyed a fresh start. And it's wonderful in a way not to be so encumbered by history that despite having a great viticultural past, the current generation of winemakers really are doing things almost from scratch, in fact. And I think that means that, well, hopefully you'll see with the wines we're trying this evening, you've got wonderful purity, wonderful elegance. I haven't done my research sufficiently to tell you, but maybe we'll find out before the end of the session. I think Austria must have one of the very highest percentages of organic and biodynamic viticulture in the world. It's certainly all 3 of the wines that we're drinking this evening are all biodynamic wines, minimal intervention winemaking, lots of, natural fermentation, spontaneous fermentation, natural yeast, minimal sulfites, no chemicals, certainly no antifreeze, and no pesticides or herbicides. So Austria, for me, leads the way in clean, pure, focused, terroir-driven, beautiful, minerally refreshing wines. And yeah, as you can tell, I'm a bit of a fan. Charlie.
There's a good question from Anna asking whether they actually blend the Gruner at all. And I think, to my knowledge, they're really proud of the grape, and it's one that they champion. Like a lot of countries get behind a certain grape. And for Austria, it's definitely Gruner. I don't know, do they blend? Do you know of good blends or not?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you will see it occasionally in experimental blends, but not necessarily often in Austria, in fact. Gruner, I've seen some Gruner blended into experimental vineyards in South Africa, in Oregon, but actually, as Charlie says, it is the signature grape for Austria, and it was a bit like saying, do you see Pinot Noir blended in Burgundy? It's maybe it happens. Certainly did in the past. A good sort of Moroccan vintage of old thin green strippy Burgundy from the 50s would have a healthy dollop of North African grapes. But I think Gruner is fast being recognised as one of the noble varieties, and with good reason. And I think that gives us every good reason to focus now on our first wine of the evening, the Hirsch Gruner, the Kamptal wine. It's from Kamptal, from Kamen. So I'm going to pull up my first map just so I can locate you all in Austria. Generally, here we go. Let's see. Getting quite excited. Will this one work first time?
I've got to find a good drum roll somewhere.
Yeah, we kind of need it, don't we? All right. Now, oh, I think Charlie, I think you'll be quite impressed. Here we go. Let's see. How did that work?
I'm on tenterhooks.
Is it up? It's good.
No. Oh, there we go.
Yep.
Oh,
perfect.
Look. Right country and everything.
Right country, right size. Exactly. Good. Perfect. Okay. So as you can see, this is another of the wine maps. I've been using Wine Folly quite a lot for these sessions. They're very, very good. I recommend their website highly. They're nice, clean, simple maps. They don't get too carried away. Everything's pretty clear and pretty straightforward. Vienna here in the northeast of the country. And then the key regions that we're going to be focusing on today are Kamptal here at the top of the Kamp River, which breaks off from the Danube. And then we're going to be moving around really down past Carnuntum. And we're going to be dropping to Lietherberg first. And then Nathan or someone else who can speak German might have to correct my pronunciation here. Neusiedlersee, or the Neusel Lake.
Neusiedlersee.
Neusiedlersee, there we go. Yeah, which is the region specifically to the east of the beautiful Neusiedl Lake, which I believe is it's the largest steppe plain lake in Middle Europe, if that makes sense. But anyway, so there is our map of Austria. I'm going to dig straight in now to Kamptal, where we're going to. But just before I do, you'll notice leading almost due west from Vienna, we have the Danube. And then we sort of take a bit of a turn to the north, and we go through the regions of the Wachau, very famous for its Gruner, and then Kremstal, also very famous for Gruner. And finally, we're ended up Kamptal, which makes excellent Gruner, and we'll also deal briefly with the wonderful Riesling it makes too. So let's pull up map number 2. I wonder, will it swap instantly?
Oh,
it was all going so well.
Who needs Premier League football, and we've got this excitement? Will the map work?
I mean, honestly, waiting for my maps to load up.
You know, I think we need to call Sky Sports.
Yeah, here it is. Yeah. So, as you can see, the Kamp River springs off from the Danube here, and then winds its way up through the regions I've mentioned, Kremstal, and then into Kamptal in the north. Kamptal is about 4,000 hectares under vine, there or thereabouts. In total, Austria has about 13,000 hectares. So this makes up a good percentage of the total under vine. And it's named after the River Kamp. That's fairly straightforward. And the climate is, like so many wine regions, influenced by a couple of winds. Basically, you've got the hot winds from the Pannonian Plain, which kind of flows in through the Danube from the river valley from the east, and then we've got the sort of the cooler, milder air from the Waldviertel on the region over to the northwest. So, and actually you can see Weinviertel, just here as well. I don't know why that says northwest. Well, it says northwest of, has the map been, that's weird. Anyway, northeast looks like to me, frankly. Yeah, you know, the Pannonian Plain is over here, and Weinviertel is over here. So where we find that mix of breezes, of winds, the warmer air ensures good ripeness. The cooler air races through the vineyards and does away with the issues or the problems of rot and potential disease, fungal disease, which can cause issues in the vineyard. Right. So we are in Kamen. So Kamen is here pretty central, in fact, for Kamptal, and this is an area which is particularly well known for its Gruner Veltliner. I'm actually having a proper smell and a taste of this now. Fabulous. So this is a wine from Johannes and Sandra Hirsch. They have a 500-year-old farmstead just based here in Kamen, as I mentioned, and they own about 31 hectares throughout the region. A combination of the more stony soils that you find further up in the north, where it gets very steep. In fact, the vineyard behind me, in my background, this is one of the most famous vineyards in Austria, probably, the Heiligenstein, which is named for the blazing hot sunshine. You can see that the vines look pretty ripe. They look pretty sun-drenched to me. And this makes fantastic Riesling, because up here, the typical soil which really characterizes the Kamptal, which is this Lush soil, kind of from the German Luss, which is a combination of loam and sandstone and silt. It's so sheer, it's so steep that it can't really survive. It can't remain on the slopes. So the soil right in the north, in Heiligenstein, is rockier, and this is where you get some absolutely phenomenal Riesling. So we're not doing a Riesling this evening. We certainly could in a future session, but if you're a Riesling freak, if you love your Rieslings, you know about Alsace, you know about Germany, maybe you know about the Clare Valley in Australia, Central Otago in New Zealand, definitely worth checking out the Rieslings specifically from Kamptal in Austria. They are tremendous. Anyway, that was a bit of an aside, because we're not dealing with Riesling today. We're dealing with groovy Gruner Veltliner, which is, well, I nearly got there, a bit of a tongue twister, which is, I'm just going to stop sharing the screen now. I hate looking at maps. I'd much rather look at your lovely smiling faces. You know, Gruner Veltliner is to Austria what Sauvignon Blanc is to New Zealand, or certainly was to New Zealand. It was the grape which really put Austria on the map, and deservedly so, you know, deservedly so. It's a wonderful variety. For me, stylistically, it sits very nicely between Riesling and Sauvignon Blanc. You've got that slightly oily, petrol-y character of the Riesling, definitely a touch of lychee fruit, some elderflower character, but then the palate has almost kind of classic Sauvignon acidity, more citrus character, touch of gooseberry perhaps as well. But the thing that Gruner seems to have all of itself is this just kind of cracked twist of white pepper character as well. This nice little kind of peppery lift to the wine, which is really rather charming. So beautifully ripe, very fresh, very zingy, very minerally, very zippy. That nice kind of saline finish. You'll be unsurprised to know this is no oak at all. The vineyards from which the fruit is sourced, from the Hirsch vineyards, are about sort of between 200 and 300 meters up. And it's got a combination of these loamy, sandy Loess soils with also a little bit more iron, a bit more ferrous soils as well, which perhaps give that kind of mineral bite right at the finish. I have to say, I think it's a pretty great opener. Any comments at all? Any before we head on? There's plenty of stuff going on in the chat there, so I'm just working my way through that. Any comments there? Petroleum on the nose, which belies the fruity melon chase. Salami, oven, thin pizza with olives. We were perfect.
So, Tom, it's probably a good one to just discuss the petroleum kind of nose that some people get more in Riesling, but then in Gruner, because I think there are people that see it as a off-putting. Well, it's not a fault. It is literally not a fault, but a lot of people think, oh, there's something wrong with this.
They think it's antifreeze. Like, it smells like petrol. It's antifreeze. Yeah, no.
He got the wrong canister when he was topping it up.
Yes. No, there are. It seems to be a character of certain Teutonic varieties that they have this, decidedly petrol-y character. But we shouldn't really overdo that, because that develops far more with age. Even young Riesling, the tendency is to say, oh, it smells of petrol before you've even actually had a sniff, just because that's what you expect. Those petrol-y notes really develop with more age. I think that with the Gruner, it's more the twist of pepper that's there, the lychee, oily character. But sorry, who was it who commented about the difference between nose and palate? Let me find who was up there. I've lost you. Sorry about that. But anyway, someone correctly said that the nose was reasonably petrol-y, and yeah. Oh, there we go. Oh no, gone again. Rajesh. There we go. Yeah. And that probably leads on to another question that was asked: was how long will it age? I think whenever you try wine, red or white, and there is even a small, let alone appreciable difference between the nose and the palate, that for me always gives an indication that the wine would be comfortable with 2 or 3 more years to mesh together, for the two elements to combine, become more cohesive. And that having been said, I think this is pretty delicious now, but I would probably drink bottles that I own within the next 3 or 4 years. I think I like this wine because it still has a good zip and zing and freshness. 17 was a very warm year. You will find a vintage like 18, that followed, has a touch more acidity and a touch more freshness. So I think this is frankly well within its drinking window, and I'd probably, for interest's sake, keep a couple of bottles for 3 or 4 years. But otherwise, I'm a greedy, thirsty person, and it's a hot evening, so I'm not entirely convinced it'll last out half an hour, especially with Teresa nipping in and out to refill her glass. Yeah. Okay. Just going to have a last quick check on the chat before we move on. I have to say that the chat function doesn't make it particularly easy to sort of navigate up and down, but Simon asking a question about European weather patterns. How is Austria faring? Well, I suppose it's a bit like everywhere else. There's they've got the same difficulties, possibly even more than some, because there's such a heavy percentage of biodynamic organic viticulture. There's greater limitations on how you can chemically react. So very, very damp years, or sudden deluge of rain, generally you can't use a lot of spray to mitigate against this. So I would say, however, that the effect of the Pannonian climate, the Weinviertel winds coming across, you're sufficiently central, you've got plenty of nice mollifying geological and geographical effects that keep things in place. So yeah. So anyway, let's move on to our rosé. Where has it gone? Here we go. Perfect. Right, new map coming up shortly.
Yes.
Pouring myself a glass. Yes. I've got some, I don't know what people are having as their accompaniments this evening. I've got some pretzels, some salted pumpkin seeds and some interesting looking Austrian meats. So there we go. Yeah. Right, I'm just going to share this map. Here we go. Right. Any minute now. Perfect. Oh, I think this is going to work a charm, Charlie. I think you'll be impressed.
I literally just sheer excitement, goosebumps.
There you go. Can everyone see that?
Oh, look at that.
Here we go. It's coming. It'll come. Anyway, so we're moving into the Burgenland here, and specifically the area around Lietherberg. And this is, well, you'll see here the Lietherberg range, mountain range here, and we've got the lovely Neusiedlersee. I'm going to get it by the end of the session for sure. And this, having talked about Gruner Veltliner being Austria's signature grape, when we come down into the Burgenland, there is some Weissburgunder planted, there is some Riesling planted, there is some Gruner planted, but really what's exciting in the Burgenland, both sides of the lake, are the red varieties. And we're dealing with two red varieties, in fact, with this particular wine. The dominant grape is Blaufränkisch, which is it's Austria's signature red. In fact, I think 30% of plantings in the country, I'll just check that on my little notes up here. Well, sorry, 30% of Austria's plantings are red, of which the vast majority is Blaufränkisch. There is Pinot Noir planted. We're going to come on to Zweigelt in a bit and Saint Laurent, but yeah, Blaufränkisch is the chief grape. Just and as an addendum to that, obviously the 70% remaining production is of course white, of which Gruner Veltliner is at least 90% of that, in fact. Right, so on to this. Beautiful rosé. What a great nose. Everyone stick their noses in that. Isn't that beautiful? God. For me, it knocks the socks off an awful lot of overpriced sort of, you know, Southern French Provençal stuff. What character. Great, great. Blaufränkisch is not Pinot Gris. It's actually known as Lemberger in Germany, and something unpronounceable with some accents in Hungarian, which I haven't written down. So, but no, it's Lemberger is how you might know it across the border. Gosh, that's rather lovely. So the area that we're in here in Lietherberg, just west of the lake, is about 300 hectares, and it's one of the oldest wine regions in the world. There are grape pips you found in burial tombs. People were buried with grapes to see them on their way into the afterlife in the 8th century BC. And this, therefore, is evidence of viticulture. And this also means that this is evidence that this is the oldest wine growing region in Middle Europe. So there you go. I bet you didn't know that. So Burgenland in Austria, Lietherberg, oldest Middle European wine growing region. Fascinating, fascinating. I'm going to come out of the map now. There we go. Okay. Once again, we have the effects of breezes, of winds, in fact. Firstly, the warming lake breezes coming off Lake Neusel, which once again help achieve good ripeness in the fruits and allow a certain richness of character. But then you've got the cooler air coming off the mountain, off the Lietherberg range, and this allows the grapes to rest at night. It means, once again, it cools them nicely, so you don't bake out the aromatics, you don't bake out the freshness. And once again, both breezes help to avoid the problems of fungal disease and rot spreading through the vines. So they're very fresh, healthy, just like our children behind Nathan and Alfred, actually, with Sister Maria. You know, these are very healthy, sort of subalpine, you know, rosy-cheeked grapes. They're really leading a very good, clean outdoor life. and isn't this rosé delicious? You know, I keep coming back to it time and time again because it is just absolutely lovely. Got so much character and yet so much freshness at the same time. I've seen a comment from Anna here. The main areas for dessert wines and noble rot, they do tend to be down further south in the Burgenland, in fact, around here, but also where we're crossing to next. In fact, the next region we're going to come to, you see quite a few dessert wines. They're grown all over the place in Austria, but particularly further down in the south, you see a lot of fantastic noble rot wines, which are really terrific. Probably the most famous name, I'm getting diverted, but it's your fault, Anna, is Alois Kracher, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, very, very young, but he's worth looking out for. His wines, they are incredible dessert wines. He makes the most extraordinary ice wine as well, which is extraordinary. These are the partially frozen grapes, delicious, and he's based down here. So Birgit. So Birgit Braunstein has been in the area for I think she's second generation, and she now runs the estate with her two sons, Max and Felix, and I think one of the key characters here is her winemaker, who's a lady called Adriana Gonzalez, who is the only female cellar master in Austria since 2008. Extraordinary, but there we go. There we are. And she was the winner of Vintner of the Year in Gore Media in 2005. That's gore as in gourmet, I think, rather than gore as in splatter, hammerfest sort of thing, I assume. And it's a wonderful, wonderful winery. They're based in a place called Purbach, which is to the north of the region. I can pull the map back up if you like, but I'm not going to. It's to the north. It's very close to the lake shores. And the wine route, and it is a gorgeous wine route to travel. I've only done it the once, in fact, but you've got a lovely place called Joy in the north and all the way down to Zagersdorf in the south. And it's about 31-kilometer drive, wineries either side, lake on one side, mountain on the other. Stunning, absolutely beautiful. So here we've got the mainly Blaufränkisch character, with a little touch of the Zweigelt thrown in for good measure. And the vineyards, as I say, are mostly on the Lietherberg mountain lower slopes, which are sort of schist and limestone dominant, in fact. And you know, wherever we see limestone, we know we're going to get minerality. And I think that's what you get with this wine. It's a very complete rosé. As Rajesh points out, absolutely. More complex than typical Provençal rosé, mineral notes. I couldn't agree more. And yeah, it's an impressive wine, and I think it's sufficiently substantial whilst being fresh that you can get pretty creative with your food pairings with this. Whilst it's gorgeous on its own, you know, you can really try this with sort of game birds, with duck, with some meat dishes, even some spiced character too. It's got real class and real panache and real character and presence. So moving on, we're staying in the Burgenland, but we're crossing the lake, and I'm going to pull up my next map whilst we move on to. Oh yeah, Charlie. Yeah.
Whilst you do that, Karen was just asking how cold we should have this rosé, and it's a good question because obviously there is quite a lot of complexity and quite a lot of fruit on the nose. So with any wine, the more you chill it, the less sort of fruit characters you will find in it. So that's hence why very sort of simple light wines with not huge amounts can be drunk very chilled. Same like champagne, that there's not a huge amount. So I think if you a bit of a guide, you can probably get away with taking it out of the fridge probably half an hour before you actually really want to serve it, because the fridge is going to be around 5, 6, 8 degrees, and really it should be coming more at sort of 12, 14, something like that. You wouldn't.
So not 2 lumps of ice like my normal Provence rosé.
No, Karen. No. No.
If it has to be lumps, then no, it's definitely more of a food wine, and Provence rosé again is a good example of. There's not a huge amount of complexity, hence why we can get away with putting quite a bit of ice either in it, but that's normally because we want to start at 11 o'clock, and so we say, well, if it's got ice in it, it'll be okay.
Thank you, it's delicious.
It's rather nice. And by the way, we should all have the 2019 rosé. I've got the 2019, so I think that was just an error on Charlie's with the vintage, but maybe not. I don't know. Has anyone got? Has anyone got rosé 18?
Sorry, that may have been me. I just rushed to make the tasting notes, possibly.
We'll forgive you in time, Charlie. Don't worry. Yeah.
I tell you what, why don't we trade on maps, and I'll trade on vintages, and
yeah, fair enough. Touche. As we move on to our red, I'd like you just to go back and notice the ABVs on the back here. We haven't had a red, and we haven't had a wine over 12.5%. Isn't that refreshing, particularly on a warm evening like this? No shortage of character in the wines. I don't think you could say either of them thus far have been sort of bland or insipid or light. There's great intensity, but how joyous it is to have wines that are under 12.5%. It's just fantastic, I think. So anyway, on to our final wine, the red. Okay. Now that's a proper nose. Now we've got some real pepper. I see a few people making interesting and entirely justified comments about how it's all well and good having this beautiful little glass stopper, but you're right. If you look at what's left around the top, that's pretty much designed to shred your palms. All I could suggest in that, guys, is to open the wine, if you're using a knife, underneath the kind of rim of the annulus rather than on the top. But it's a fair point. It is rather lovely though, these glass stoppers. Funnily enough, these glass stoppers in wine production terms, they predated cork in one guise or another. Before cork became commonplace to bottle wines, they would use glass stoppers. Anyway, God, now that's a great nose. Wow, for me that is Austrian red epitomized. Absolutely love it. When I first moved to London, I remember going to the Wolsey and for lunch, or maybe it was brunch actually, and having their superb haggis, duck egg and fried bread brunch. And wow, that's a proper heart-stopping / heart-starting meal. And I was looking on the wine list, which was pretty exorbitant. And what did I find but an Austrian Zweigelt? And it was very affordable and very drinkable. And I've been in love with Zweigelt and Austrian reds really ever since then. And this was 20 odd years ago. The great Lucinda is Zweigelt. So Zweigelt is a cross between Blaufränkisch and another Teutonic varietal called Saint Laurent. And it was invented by Professor Fritz Zweigelt in 1922. I was dying to have a grape named after me. I think I'd love the Harrow grape. I'm not sure what it would be yet, but I think that would be a true honor to have a grape named after myself. I'm very envious of those people who have done. Admittedly, an awful lot of the hybrid grapes aren't terribly exciting, but I think Zweigelt is rather delicious because you get I'd say you get some of the fruitiness of the Blaufränkisch with some of the minerality and more herbal character of the St. Laurent. And it's really rather tasty. Here comes the map. Dun, dun, dun. You'll see, or you will see shortly, that it's on the other side of the lake, in fact. So, can you see it now? Is that up, Charlie?
Sorry, I fell asleep. Yes, there it is.
So we're based here in Gols, just on the northern tip of the lake, and this is a fabulous story. You know, Gurno and Heike Heinrich, they kicked off their winemaking in 1990. Sorry, beg your pardon, in 1992, and they had at the time a single hectare of vines. Flash forward to now, they've got 90 hectares, mostly on this side of the lake, with a few back around by Birgit's place up on the Lietherberg Mountains. But most of the sites, in fact, and the sites where this wine comes from, are here on the plains around the northern tip of the lake, and then down here on the Pandendorfer Platte. Where you've got a kind of quite flat, quite earthy soils, and you end up with this really rather complex, exciting, minerally, properly driven wine, I think. And definitely looking at the notes, got some good pepper character here for sure. Lots of spicy plum character, fruit, some red currants, raspberries, but also some darker cherry character as well.
The thing I like about it as well is it really doesn't have that sort of tannins that were more Pinot Noir style. It's very fresh, very drinkable, with fruit complexity.
Yeah, and what do we say? 12%, 12.5%, 12%. As a couple of people, I think it was Anna pointed out, doesn't taste like 12%. Perfect example of intensity without density. You know, really plenty of character here, but without, you know, the corresponding alcohol tag that you sometimes expect. It's great with roast game birds, Hungarian goulash, and chanterelles. So I think maybe a roast partridge and chanterelle goulash. I'm hoping at least one person has prepared that, had the foresight to prepare that this evening. If not, you know, there's probably a chance to do so.
Well, those are store-covered essentials, surely, for most people.
Oh, well done, Dom and Steph. I'm waiting to see you produce the dish from the kitchen. Yeah, excellent. Isn't it? But it's really lovely. For me, it's a great Sunday lunch wine. Totally. You know, this, I would encourage those of you who are not like me and likely to finish it this evening. Do try and leave at least a couple of glasses, if not more, to enjoy tomorrow and even, you know, frankly, for Saturday, because what you'll notice is the wine really opens up rather charmingly. The Heinrich couple, you know, are very, very, you know, keen on let's not say natural winemaking, but certainly minimal interventionists. They are, like all the wines tonight, biodynamic. They don't use new oak, so this is aged in wooden vats and some big 500-litre old oak barrels. It spends 2 weeks on the skins just to pull out some more character, to extract some more flavor and tannins and color. But it's all sort of spontaneous fermentation, natural yeasts, and they are, I would say, one of the absolute leaders in the minimal intervention winemaking movement in Austria. But what's so nice is, despite that, you would never say that this wine is anything other than very clean, very pure, very focused. And that can sometimes be an issue with minimal interventionist winemaking, is a certain lack of clarity to the wines. Whereas here, you've got wonderful freshness, great zip and zing. Now, Rajesh saying, is this ruby red color typical of the region? Brusque start and mellow finish. Yes, it's typical, not so much of the region, it's typical of the grape itself, of Zweigelt. You know, it's got slightly more richness than the Blaufränkisch would have on its own if we were trying a red Blaufränkisch. So it's quite a bright color, and that's more varietal based than regionally based. And yes, it's interesting your comment, brusque start, mellow finish. I think, well, this is a wine which probably wouldn't have hurt to decant it, truth be told. And if not, as I said, leave it overnight, leave what's left overnight, and you'll certainly have something really rather special for lunch tomorrow, and even dinner, in fact. For me, these three wines represent the very modern face of Austria. But then again, there's very few estates which do anything other than that, frankly, these days. If we were to go right the way back up to Kamptal, where we began, then there's a glorious old estate, the other side of the Kant River, Schloss Gobelsberg, which sounds like one of those fabulous, and it is one of those fabulous kind of Teutonic castles that you see, you know, rising out of the mountains. And that is an amazing place to visit. And that has an illustrious history. It's been making wine for several hundred years. But by and large, the Austrian wine industry, as I said right at the start, unencumbered by the weight of history and tradition, is quite frankly able to reinvent itself to make wines like this that are fresh, that are clean, that are terroir driven, that have very pure fruit, that are focused, have good length, good structure, nice mid-palate texture, that are very classy. These are very classy wines, and all of that for 12.5% and under. You know, it's also, I have to say, one of the best countries for wine tourism. If you want to have a fabulous long weekend, heading out to Vienna and doing the wine routes is just brilliant fun. Really, really is. They have a glorious habit where I think almost every day, every other winery tends to be open on a different wine trail. So you can stop off, try a glass or two. Best to cycle, I have to say. You know, get on your bike, cycle down, try a glass or two. They've always got some little, you know, food accompaniments, some charcuterie, some knödel, etc., bits and pieces. Have a nibble, ride on. It's just glorious, actually. Stunning countryside, delicious wines. So moved on from any previously held misconception about Austrian wines. It's a region, if you haven't yet discovered, I hope this has been just enough of a taster.
I have to say, actually, some of the, I'm going to cut across you because you just keep going, so it's a bit easier. That actually probably the biggest food discoveries I found was in Austria with Austrian wines, because they sort of serve up these amazing heavy stews that we're all assume that they should be heavy reds with these big sort of strudel, there's the desserts, but these big sort of stumps and stuff like that. And in fact, they give you this Gruner, and it's a complete revelation to the sort of the pairings that they put together. It's quite extraordinary. And I went with preconceptions that Austrian food was relatively dull and probably a little bit more in the sort of goulash Hungarian style of food. And my eyes were very, very much opened in terms of what there is out there. And like you say, the scenery is absolutely stunning as well. So I definitely agree with a trip out there.
Yeah.
Can I come in on?
Please, Nathan. Yeah.
So I mean, obviously, some of you will know I lived in Germany for several years, so speaking German is an advantage. But in normal times, obviously not at the moment, you can spend a long weekend. You can stay by the opera in Vienna on the Gürtel, the ring road, the inner ring roads of Vienna, and literally get to most of the vineyards that Tom's been talking about by cycling on the U-Bahn, on the S-Bahn, the overground train out to the Weinviertel and out to Wachau, Langenlois that Tom showed on the map before. And there's this lovely cultural thing in Austria and the Vienna region of the Heuriger, which Tom hasn't mentioned, which are essentially the pub gardens as we'd see them. But they go all the way from places where famous composers like Beethoven actually, the pub garden where he composed, all the way to 2- and 3-star Michelin restaurants. And when you go out to Langenlois and onto along the Danube, it's just really glorious. And for those of us who think that Austria is like my stereotyped Sound of Music that I've got in my background this evening, actually you've got to remember that this end of Austria, Austria's like, the big end of it is the skiing bit. This end by the Danube is low-lying along the Danube and then hills, as you can see behind Tom. And it's the most glorious place to spend just a long weekend tasting some of the different wines. And then you go off to the northeast into Slovenia and so on. And, some really lovely wines across the border there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. It's got to be first lockdown long weekend, post lockdown long weekend destination. Out to Vienna and the environs. I remember being there probably best part of a decade ago, there or thereabouts, and it was for the Born Digital Wine Awards. So anyway, some kind of wine conference thing in Vienna. And I remember getting up quite late one morning, having breakfast with Ellen McCoy, who is the Wall Street Journal's wine writer, who's fantastic, really lovely. And she'd been one of the panelists. And we were having breakfast, and I realized I'd missed the bus, the coach that was taking everyone out to the Wachau for our wine tour. So I got on a train. As far as the train would get me, which was pretty close to where we were meant to be going. I hopped off at the end of the line, and I managed to catch a lift with a postman, in fact, who was more than happy. When I told him the restaurant the winery and restaurant we were heading to, he said, "Oh, I've got some posts sort of fairly nearby." It was about 20 kilometers away, but I tooled up in the post van just as the coach arrived with all my fellow delegates for this wine conference. And if for that reason and no other, I have very, very fond memories of traveling near and along the Danube. But as Nathan was saying, it really is a fabulous place to go visit. The wine, the food, culture, the people, and the extraordinary scenery. It's somewhere which doesn't immediately spring to mind, but as I said, I hope these wines give you an indication of what to expect and why you should go for more. I've moved back to the rosé. Now, just having a look here at a few comments. Headwater do a week-long cycling tour along the Danube. They move your bags. That's very sensible. So Catherine and Mark, obviously big fans, preaching to the converted here. It's good to know. Let's do a quick straw poll, hands up, on favorite wine of the evening, because they're all incredibly different, to be fair. But I'd like to know. So, whose favorite was our first wine, the signature white grape of Austria, the Gruner Veltliner? Let's have a show of hands there. Okay, 1, 3, 4, 5. Okay, but fairly good. Okay, good number. Yep.
Yeah, maybe half.
Maybe half. Okay. Hands up, whose favorite was the rosé? Oh yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, good percentage. Yep. So,
yeah. Okay. It's like 6 or so. Maybe.
Okay,
a bit more.
and last of all, well, that's exactly the remainder. I'm assuming was the red. So let's just put your hands up, just so you don't feel left out. Okay. Good. Okay. Jeremy, not a fan.
Jeremy's not allowed to put his hand up.
Yeah.
Anna tells him what to drink. It's
probably no. To be fair, probably on the leaner, more savoury side than the sort of reds I know you tend to prefer. Actually, it's not. It's certainly It's horses for courses, shall we say? Okay, interesting. Well, I think we're sort of come to our official break point for this evening, but oh, Tanji, you've just raised your hand. Does that mean you've got a comment? Oh, cool. Hang on, great. Let me unmute you. Do that. Wait a minute. Why can't I? Oh, lower hand. Tanji, go for it. Oh.
Oh no, you muted her again. Oh.
Did you meet me?
What did I do? Sorry. God.
Can you hear me?
We can definitely hear you now. Gotcha. Yeah.
Okay, cool. No, as you know, I'm a big white fan, champagne fan. So this has been an interesting evening. And I have enjoyed, I must say, my favorite has been the red. Very different. Yes.
Why do you think that's the case? What appeals to you?
I don't know. I think perhaps it was the appetizers that I chose, which were rather heavy with the salami and the olives and all of that. So probably the heaviness of the appetizers actually lended themselves to the red. But I must admit, I'm not a rosé drinker, but you've convinced me, Tom. So hey,
wow. There we go. Well, that's not me, Tanji. That's Birgit Brodsky. Remember her name.
Okay.
She's convinced you. She's convinced
Exactly. Because she's the woman with yes.
Exactly.
There you go, Tom. So you haven't had a grape named after you, but you've converted people to wine. It's the next best thing. Come on.
That's what he does all the time.
Thank you, Mark. Very kind of you. Yeah. And thank you for your comments about the opportunity to do the bike tours as well. That I'm sure would and should be of interest.
I mean, if you do, I will. The one recommendation would always be do west to east, because that's the predominant wind direction.
Aha.
We had what was called a rest day, where we kind of took ourselves to another castle and then back to the hotel. And going back to the hotel east to west, we were into the wind. It was quite a difference.
Yeah.
But the whole thing, as in any Germanic, Austrian, the towpaths are paved most of the way. So you're not riding a UK canal side bank. You are riding a tarmac. You will be overtaken by lycra-wearing Austrians in the most amazing gear. Cycle,
or UK.
That should not be worn. But you'll see all sorts of. But that particular holiday, Headwater moved the bags, so we were carrying what we needed on a day.
I like that.
We stayed in milk, in creme.
Yeah.
Eventually ended up in. We started in Passau on the German border, and ended in Vienna. And a couple of bits where they are more industrial than others. They actually encourage you to get on these cruise ships. Yeah. And we got on this sort of bling palace, really, out of Passau. No, but yeah. And then we just went 2 stops down the river and then cycled the towpath again.
Nice.
Even if you're not we're not serious cyclists. It was just wonderful through the wine valleys of the Wachau.
What we need to do without the kids.
And so you could stop. You could sample wine, as you said.
Yeah. And
the right time of year, you got fresh apricots. You've got asparagus. You're not there for the wine harvest period, but I'm also guessing that actually September would be an equally good time to do that sort of trip.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
But Austria Rail, if you don't want to pay the overhead for Headwalls, Austria Rail will actually pick up your bag for about €5 a bag and move them to a hotel. So you can actually do this yourself, book it yourself type through a tour down there. 2 nights in milk, 2 nights in creme.
Right.
That whole Danube Valley is absolutely gorgeous. And
there you go, team. You heard it here.
Great wines.
Yeah, exactly. Get on your bikes, quite literally, and get out to Austria.
You could probably walk somewhere if you wanted. And then the boats are there to pick you up and move you on.
Perfect. Well, team, wonderful to see you all this evening. And as I said, been an exploration of region that is less well known but deserves to be far better known and far better explored, as we've also discovered. Next week we have grape expectations, I believe. So this will be, rather than doing a regional focus, we're taking 3 of my, are they my favorite grapes? They're 3 grapes which, when done well, are very exciting, but they don't tend to get as much limelight as perhaps they should. So we'll be doing a bit of a red focus. We obviously had 100% white last week, so this will be something a little different. And then after that we have South Africa, and after that we have Australia. And watch this space for our next session after that. Alongside,
we all love to be out and about by then.
Well, yeah, yes, it's very.
These are great, guys. Absolutely.
Yeah, the next one might be live rather than virtual, that's for sure. But nevertheless, we've actually got some winemakers joining us live for a couple of events we've got planned, which is something that we can't necessarily always do in our regular tastings. So watch this space. We've got an English sparkling wine versus champagne tasting coming up. Oh, and very importantly, Luke's just pointed out, for all of our Premier Crew Club members who are here this evening, and frankly, anyone who would like to join, we have a BYO and a quiz on the 2nd of June. So more details of that, Charlie will be sending around, and all the other events that we've mentioned. And I very much look forward to seeing, hopefully, all of you next week. If this was your first time, it was pretty sort of standard of how things go. So if you hated it, I guess we won't ever see you again. Apologies. If you did like it, then please do join us for some more sessions. There's some great wines coming up. And Tanji, excellent. Well done. Brilliant. Fantastic. Everyone's coming back. Very good news indeed. Cool. Well, I'll just do a cheers. Those who need to leave, please do. I'm going to stay on for another 5 minutes or so before our clapping time. But thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Nathan, as well. And goal.
Cheers, Tom, and the HG team. Well done.
Thank you. Thanks, Graham. Cheers.
I think we should, Tom. I think we should do a rosé face-off. I have after that Provence sample that you and I had, that was absolutely vile. I want to publish your review, and I've just had an equally vile Italian rosé. That whereas the Chiaretta that you know,
rosés,
right, and the Braunstein one is fantastic. So we should do a rosé face.
Malbec one.
Yeah, I'll. So I'm actually just gonna find that email now. Actually,
I did want to post that to Instagram, but I thought I might get I thought I might get a little bit of opprobrium from Brad and Angelina.
It was Malbec rosé, which was absolutely superb.
Well, my absolute favourite is from Villa Sfarina, who do marvellous Gavi di Gavi and Barbera, and they do one called La Chiaretta, which, if I remember correctly, Tom, is it got a dollop of
Barbera with a dollop of Merlot. Barbera with a
dollop of Merlot, and it's £14.90, and I buy it by the dozen because it's absolutely marvellous on the terrace. But Tom and I have just been sampling some rather well-known, well-publicised, well-hyped Provençal rosé, which was absolutely vile. And when you compare it with the one we've got from the Cars family, which is the Domaine de l'Ostal, which is absolutely zinging and tasty. Whereas, it shows you the thing with rosé is all about how much people spend on marketing it. The one with, I wanted to like it as well, but it's a well-known, well-promoted rosé. So it's absolutely vile. Tom, you've got to find your...
I am. It's just here we go. No,
the ghostly pallor. You've got to listen to this review, guys.
What was the here we go. I'll find it. So just everything's so slow when you've got Zoom opening here, but here we go. Was it yesterday or the day before?
Tom, while you're finding that email, bit of advice. This rosé is, in my opinion, exceptional. However, as a man at a barbecue, how do you walk around with a rosé and not look like a total douche?
It's called
Okay.
owning your style.
I'm not very good at
You're doing it in
my
Mark
style,
and you're having
but
coffee.
it's absolutely fantastic. But obviously, all
Very
your
I'll tell
mates
you
are
what.
drinking
Yeah.
beers, and you want this
Being
amazing
quite
rosé that all the girls are drinking.
Yeah, being
Yeah.
quite serious, the thing about rosé is I do not like rosé generally. I associate it with sharp, acidic, dilute stuff. But if you've ever had a really good rosé, and the one I was talking about, the two I was talking about were both around the £15 level, nothing exceptional. You can get absolutely beautiful, boaty, beautiful wines. And they're just right for this sort of day and for barbecues, and particularly with grilled fish and stuff like that. So own your style. Own your
Yes,
style.
I have to agree with that. But although I'll tell you a quick interesting aside on that front. I was approached by someone to get involved in a new rosé project. This was last year, and the plan was that he was friendly with Idris Elba. And the idea was that he had convinced Idris Elba to be the global brand ambassador for this rosé, very specifically because he said, quite frankly, that would work. That would totally work. That would totally work. Whatever, you know, whatever your sexual proclivities, whatever your gender, wherever you are in between, if it's a rosé that Idris Elba loves and endorses, who the hell is not going to want that wine? So, you know, yeah. But frankly, the project didn't come to anything, but, you know, nevertheless, I think it's got legs, frankly. So just on that note, we don't need to mention the rosé in question, but was sent a sample, and this was my tasting note. Which was, here we go. We all know the paler your pink, the more sophisticated the drinker you are. But here the colour is bleached to an almost corpse-like pallor. White peach and grapefruit nose, like the Bellinis we had in plastic flutes in the pool at the Four Seasons in Florence on my stag do, Poulinis, and just as she and overpriced. Whiffs of passion fruit hubba bubba and candy floss emerge, but don't really improve things. The palate, such as it is, juggles green acidity and bubblegum sweetness, but drops them both. And following the sourness and confection, there is a salty tang, a note of camphor, like licking a piswin oiled forehead. So there you go. That was we won't be offering that one.
You have to tell us now. You can't just do that.
I've already given it away. If you listen carefully.
Okay, so I was on Whispering Angel or Angelina
How many
Jolie.
years ago?
Who came up with that?
That was my tasting note for quite a famous rosé, which
Yeah.
I will put on.
Pretentious.
I will put on Instagram at some point because you know, yeah.
You have to name and shame now.
Yeah, you
Well,
have-
like you'll see it on Instagram.
Most
so
definitely name and shame.
He shamed
I
himself
think
by
the
writing
serious-
that thingy.
The serious point, guys, is that marketing is everything when it comes to rosé, and you know, sticking a famous name or a film star or something next to the name of a rosé makes it good, and it just ain't.
So it's Angelina.
Might be, yeah.
Might be, I think so.
Got me.
It's a shame because it used to be a wine I really liked back in
And
the
I
day.
love the bottle. It gives you the most stinking headache you've ever had. That stuff.
Yeah.
Because they spray it too much.
Ah, there you go, Karen. You see, you're yeah.
Yeah.
It's not the fact that the evening afterwards finishes with vodka chasers that could have
on the yacht, obviously, but you know.
Yeah, we won't be in Monaco, Tom, this year, but we'll do
No,
something else instead.
No.
No.
I was meant to be out for the Grand Prix as well, of course, hosting things. So tonight, but there we go. Next year.
Oh, yes, it is. You're right. It's tonight.
It's tonight. It all kicks off.
We missed Chelsea Flower Show. We've missed the Grand Prix. It's kind of
Yeah.
Well, you're here.
It's very sad.
But we've got this. We've got each other, so it's all fine. This is
Thank you,
a
guys.
very
Honestly,
close
it's been amazing.
Lovely to see you, Karen.
Yeah.
Lovely to see all of you. Thank
See you
you so much. Very much for joining us, team.
Bye.
And we'll see you. Hopefully, see all of you next week.
Thank you very much, Tom. See you next week.
See you.